Hey Amar, welcome to the Moltbook Reset. How are you doing today?
Hey, Harman, pleasure to be here. Thanks a lot for having me. Super exciting times and uh, our pleasure to be here and chatting with you.
Amazing. And I must tell you, Amar, it's not every day I meet someone who is working so closely at the intersection of blockchain, AI, and real world systems. I definitely would love to share with our audience more about the current work that you are doing. But just as a preface to our discussion, so the Moltbook Reset is a podcast we started after understanding that Moltbook was a very important event and it will become a historical event eventually because it forces us to rethink how we define trust, security, and accountability in the AI space when AI agents act on their own, right? And while that discussion is happening, the role of blockchain in that post agentic world might seem obvious. It has been obvious in a lot of discussions, but at the same time, due to its early experiments and research, blockchain seems to be force fed in many use cases that might not actually need blockchain, which is kind of like deteriorating the actual need of blockchain and underscoring its importance. Through this podcast is what we aim to do. So that's what the whole podcast will be about. We invite innovators building at the intersection of AI, blockchain, and real world systems, as we were mentioning, and we try to understand what should change, what should stay, and what comes next, right? So with that, I would love to open up with a brief intro about yourself for for our listeners and take it from there.
Fantastic. I mean, I think this is the most exciting thing that's happening in the world right now. So kudos to you for kicking off like the conversations in this space over here. Quick intro about me. I'm from Delhi, India. Grew up there, started life in finance, doing investment banking, consulting, and then got into early stage investments with a Malaysian corporate fund, helped them do a few acquisitions in Singapore and do venture building and set up a couple of startups across Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, China. And in that process, moved to Singapore about 11 years ago. Since then, I've been with late stage companies like Uber and Grab, set up their ops and BD respectively. Realized during COVID that I didn't want to be a cog in a wheel, quit to kick off my entrepreneurial journey, which started with the Web2 freelancer marketplace. And this was during the last kind of Web3 hype cycle of 2021. So ended up going in deep down the rabbit hole, reading a bunch of books and understanding what makes this whole ecosystem and blockchain really tick. Like, why are people excited by this? And I'll kind of come to even connect the dots with what you were talking about after this. And in that process, I realized that, there is always across in the history of technology, when something new comes up, there is a natural hype associated with it. And over a period of time, that hype dies because it takes time from people just getting excited by a concept, which is usually the hype phase, to getting part of everyday life where you think it's ubiquitous, where you don't even think about it as technology anymore. So if you look back to, 500 years ago when the Luddites were complaining about handlooms and saying like, this is against being a human, the way to be human truly is not to kind of have all these tools. That continues till today. And it happened, say, with the industrial revolution, happened with the internet revolution, and the same is happening with the AI revolution. So, as we kind of went down this path of Web3, I think for us specifically was let's build some really meaningful technology that in the future becomes ubiquitous. And it's not focused around the hype of what people are thinking about what Web3 should be all about. There was a period where everyone was talking about how everything should be an NFT and everything should be decentralized. And when you really get into the weeds, you start understanding what the benefits of each of these things are, where there is a real value of decentralizing networks and ecosystems, and when there's a reason why centralized businesses work well because they can guarantee delivery, right? So you have multiple reasons why all scenarios should exist in the world today. So what we do at Tashi essentially is we built network that allows machines to coordinate with each other without having any servers in the middle. So if we think about how most of the internet is built, it's two kind of core ways of thinking about it. One is the client server model, where everybody connects to a server and the server is kind of the authority. And the second is peer to peer. So about 10 years back, the internet was 50-50 peer to peer, where, BitTorrent and all these different file sharing platforms were live. And that started going down as people were more focused on trust and a whole bunch of other factors. So you kind of trusted the centralized authority that was helping you manage whatever you did online. As we're now changing that gear, and everything is now becoming autonomous, every device uh, is becoming autonomous, and that's on the back of AI agents kind of becoming more and more real. You see that all of these agents need to start speaking to each other directly and not via a server, because that server creates a bottleneck. Because why go to a server when there's going to be every person in the world having an agent? Think about 8 billion agents speaking with each other. You can't kind of have an overload. Now, that's kind of where the gap really arises, is that how do these agents discover each other? How do they trust each other? And that's some of the stuff that we are trying to solve right now. What you were kind of talking about is super interesting, because we are, I would say, not even in the hype phase of AI agents right now. I think it's like the hype phase is about to kick off. Folks in the weed really understand what you were talking about with Moltbook, etc. But the average guy in the world doesn't even understand it. If you go online and see how many people run OpenClaw, which is probably the most popular agent, it's about 150,000. So if you do the math around that, that's like 0.001, like whatever, significantly insignificant number in terms of number of people running agents. And there's many people running multiple agents. So, the number even goes down. So if you think to the life cycle of any technology, right? Your mobile phone, your laptop, your social media, and before that, say televisions and so on, everything started with an element of hype, but it starts getting maturity when at least 1% of the world has started to use that technology. And there is a long way to go from where we are to that stage. And the reason for that is some of the points that you touched upon, which is, does it have the right privacy, the right security, the right kind of experience for people? The people understand it. What are they using it for? How are they using it? There's a multitude of things that need to be solved to go from, say, a few 100,000 people using agents to 1 billion people in the world using agents. And I think that's going to be the evolution that we'll see in the next 5 years, is where 10% of the world's population will be using agents, and where it'll be a normal thing. Every phone will have an agent. Everyone's going to be not even talking about it as a exciting thing. It'll just be a daily life, right? You will have a name for your agent. You'll connect it wherever you need to, and so on. And that's where I think, for the average person, I'm sure you probably touch upon this, is why does blockchain become critical in this whole process, right? Because there is, the purists in the AI world actually don't like blockchain at all. And that's mainly because of all the negative press blockchain has gotten, because of all the speculation around with, and all the pumps and dumps, right? Like all the bad actors that have also been part of the world. But when you think about why it's critical, is when you're thinking about this as an agent will need its own identity, and it has to become autonomous. It needs a wallet as well, then it can truly transact. And for that world, blockchain is the best infrastructure, where it's easy to have a decentralized identity, easy to find people in that world, easy to have a wallet on blockchain, which doesn't cost crazy amounts of money to transfer funds, and you can do small numbers, to anyone in the world in milliseconds or seconds. So all of that infrastructure, blockchain is just perfect for. And I think that intersection is something that people are discovering right now, even the folks who have been in blockchain for a long time. And we'll see that productization of these two ecosystems coming together in the next 1 to 2 years.
Absolutely, Amar. So, a couple of things that you touched upon, which are really interesting. is number one, definitely the number of people using AI agents like OpenClaw is very small, but it has already started to impact the broader audience in a way that we couldn't have imagined before. In that way, it's very different from blockchain hype cycles, I'll say. For example, 100,000 to 150,000 people using OpenClaw, and most of them creating, automated LinkedIn that I see everywhere. They are able to reach millions of people without any external help, without any additional resources, and just with their AI agents, right? So it has already started to impact the outreach and other aspects. I see every 6 months, whenever a new update comes in an AI agents, there is one industry that gets outdated. Maybe it started with SEO or content writing, then product managers, then designers, and right, so on and so forth. So that is happening at a massive speed. But at the same time, it is becoming very difficult to understand AI hype cycles. In blockchain, it was very obvious. We know it's going to be a pump and dump. We know this is something that, okay, it's going to give you money for the next 6 months, but after that, it's gone, right? There have been so many hype cycles in blockchain that were there. So the way that I think we can define, the next critical thing that we should focus on is identifying the gaps or the challenges that AI is facing or that it might face. So, for instance, when an AI agent talks to an AI agent, what, according to you, is the most underrated security risk in that transaction?
So, a couple of interesting things you touched upon there. Um, when we talk about the overall space, right? And I think the gap that, or the most important thing that people should think about first is that these agents are still running on large language models in the first place, right? So it's the what the value the agent adds essentially is the autonomy on top of the large language model, right? So if you're kind of getting a lot of industries disrupted, it's because those models are already capable of doing multitude of things that humans would take a long time to do. So that's the first part. I think the real value of the agents is when they can think and act on their own. And that, I would say, to your question, the first part is there is a security risk in the agent itself, even before it's speaking to another agent. So that's the second order of the degree of risk that we're talking about. The first order is like your own agent. What risks does it pose to you? So if you kind of think about that in itself, the question becomes how many people, with wide coding still becoming popular and so on, actually understand the back end of systems, right? Like, where is the agent running its memory? Like, is it running on your local instance? Is it running on a cloud? If it's on the local instance, what else can it read? If it's running on a cloud, what is it integrated with? Are there security vulnerabilities when you set up that agent? Is it connected to multiple outreach channels like your, Telegram, WhatsApp? Are there open kind of, ports where somebody can come in and hack? Do you understand all of these things? So I'm not a technical guy, but I remember when OpenClaw first came out as CloudBot, and it became just the most hyped thing in December. And everyone was like, I just set up my Claude bot in 5 minutes and Mac Mini started selling out. And, I was like, okay, cool. Like, let me just test this out. I spent a couple of hours and I knew there were so many risk vulnerabilities. And just looking through it that, you don't want to take risks with your entire, system, right? Because there's so many things that are private in there. And only a week after I remember the initial hype, people started posting like, hey guys, do you know what's going on here? Like, you have to be careful about when you set these things up. So I had to call up our developer and make sure that I didn't kind of have any gaps in our setup. Was I setting it up in the right manner on the cloud, and what all did it have access to? What all the agent could do? So I think that's the first thing that most people need to understand, and I think that's where the productization will happen. Is where some of these agents will be trained by folks where they'll say, hey, don't do all these things that can go crazy, right? I'm sure you've seen some of those where agents have started like sending messages to people on WhatsApp and Telegram when it wasn't asked to, because again, it kind of disconnected the instant message from five different things that were said before. It combined a bunch of things like what's called hallucination and did actions which weren't expected, right? So that's the first one. The second order, I think, then comes in is when you have that agent set up, hopefully securely, and it's interacting with another agent. And the first order is important because, again, the question becomes what is the second agent being exposed to, right? This can second agent, if you're running your agent on your laptop and it has access to everything, and the second agent, assuming it's a bad actor, does it ask your agent and convince it to do other things, right? And that's where there is, you know, lots of unknowns right now, right? Where your question becomes that how do you trust this second agent? And that's why with Moltbook, what was happening when, say, these agents were telling other agents to, go set up accounts and do a bunch of stuff, all that is possible. So I think most important first is having your own security in place. The second part becomes knowing, are you interacting with a trusted agent, right? So it's not about finding the coolest link and saying, hey, this seems to have 1,000 stars on GitHub. Let me kind of install this skill and see like what this agent can do and so on. You know, different ways things can go wrong. Or like there's so many, especially in Web3, there's just so many people impersonated on, Telegram especially, that you never really know who you're actually chatting with, right? So, and I've had people I've known who reached out to me on LinkedIn and then connected on Telegram and, tried to basically run a scam. It's just endless, right? So when you think about that in the agentic world, it'll be easy for these agents to impersonate anyone. So then the second question becomes, is your agent empowered to connect with anybody? Right. And if it is, then how do you know it's the right person in the first place? So I think that world is still, there's so many unknowns where people are still figuring this out, like what that world would look like. There's a lot of our partners that are building, trusted algorithms to figure out where you can, before an agent connects with another agent, they run KYAs, like the know your agent kind of protocols, to make sure that the agent on the other side is a trusted one. And then the third part comes in, like what are the different things that they coordinate on or transact on and things that they do. But that's the third step that will actually come down the line. So in crypto, obviously, where people have used it really well for transacting and trading and so on, I think they've done it within well-defined parameters where your agent is well-defined to say, hey, go connect with this exchange, trade within this exchange, and so on. But when you think about the general purpose agent that has access and people haven't fully trained it and put boundaries around it, there's still many, many risks involved.
It's quite interesting, Amar, because uh, when you talk about these three different stages or three different problems, most of the discussions that I've seen across the globe when it comes to the security related to AI agents, they directly land on programmable compliance, built-in compliance and the rule engine that the agents have to follow. But if we follow this discussion, that rule engine still comes at a later stage. First, the agent security needs to be taken care of, which might be a rule engine in a sense if you call it a personal rule engine, but it has many other aspects to it, right? So, what I wanted to touch upon is when you talk about that, security at the agent level initially before it starts going out in the world, right? What are the key factors that needs to be taken care of? Is it identity, audit? What kind of other factors you think that are there that should be taken care of?
The first thing I think most people should think about is like, what is an agent, right? An agent is essentially an autonomous actor that's working on, say, a large language model that it has access to, along with context to whatever you give it, right? Like that, I would say a simplest definition I can think of. Uh, so you can use any model, right? You can connect, say, Claude or Gemini, and that doesn't matter, right? Because all these large language models have done a great job and so on. So let's not focus on that. But the second part becomes key, right? It's the context part. Because if you just have a random agent online that's doing stuff, it doesn't know anything about Harman, then it's not personalized. So when you think about security, the rules kind of come in again at the second step. The first step is the setup step, where it has access to who you are and how the agent itself is set up. Right. So I think the number one thing that people realized in this process was, do not set up your agent on your local system, because it can create lots of risk, right? Like a lot of people have had multiple kind of issues in that.
Even I have a separate laptop for my open clock for sure. And it's connected to a separate network altogether.
Exactly. So I run my OpenClaw on like our cloud instance, right? So I'm not even running it on a local system. Because on your local system you will still have some sign in, right? Like I'm connected with my MetaMask, with my Phantom, with five other things, my local banking, all my passwords are there, etc. Right? And you don't want to stop your own experience just because now I have an agent in my life, right? So it's like, oh, I need a separate thing. So that's why step one is make sure your agent is on another system. So I think that's most important, and that's why these Mac Minis have become so popular. So you either have your open or your local kind of computer that you run it on, which is separate than the one you're using, or you can run it on a cloud, which is essentially you're hiring or renting essentially compute space from somebody else. So that I think is the first key part. The second is what all that do you give it context into, right? And where all do you give it access to? So I think with OpenClaw, most people were running it in, as we've seen, in Telegram and WhatsApp and so on. Perplexity has come out with their own computer now, which is more seamlessly integrated with Google. I haven't tested that yet, but I think the feedback in general has been great, and that's the one I plan to use because it allows, once G Suite is there, that makes you a lot more productive, right? So, but the question then you have to ask yourself, and that's why I'm kind of bringing this example in, is when you're giving it that context, when I'm opening up our agent to say, you have access to my entire G Suite, which is Gmail, calendar, contacts, Google Drive, right? I'm giving it a private information and access to contacts publicly. And that's where the part where you said becomes critical about the rule engine, where it's very important when you're now setting up that agent to say, do not do these things. And I think people smarter than me have obviously done a good job in setting up some of those rules, and lots of agents with very well defined parameters are coming out for, you can say my agent needs to do, like as a BD guy, as an SEO person, as a coding guy. There's a GitHub library I was checking out in the last few days, which has over 5,000 stars, where this guy, it's called, I think the agent, something, the agency, the AI agency or something, where it's literally created 20 different profiles for AI agents with very well defined rules that this is what you're supposed to do and these are the parameters that you live in. And I think that's the part which people are now learning to understand, that within the context that you offer the agent, these are the rules that you act on, because that allows the agent to then do whatever you need it to.
Amazing. So, what we do at a personal level when we are typing a prompt, let's say in Claude or ChatGPT, we give that context in between and tell that, okay, don't go into details or give a crisp answer, or make it better. The most common prompt I'll say that people use, that is actually basically the governance part, I'll say, at a very very simpler level. And that governance part is something at a scale when you implement with AI agents, autonomous agents, that is key in making sure that the agent to agent interaction becomes secure. So my next question is, how critical is blockchain in this scenario to set up that governance? Or otherwise, if not blockchain, then who sets up this governance?
So the governance part, I think, obviously there's multiple parts to this, right? So the part on how the agent responds, part of that personality training falls within the rule books, right? I think the way I see it, at least, and there's obviously folks who've gone deep down the path, I don't think you need blockchain for governance, because that rule integration can be done via what you have your markdown files, right, where it just defines that you're supposed to act within these parameters and that's about it. I think where blockchain comes in is, it's great at identity, because when you're kind of doing more online discovery, it's significantly harder in like traditional way, because you could be behind firewalls and so on. And that's why for crypto, blockchain has just become so ubiquitous, because it's easy to find anybody once you have a wallet address and transfer funds. So that's what blockchain has done fantastically, is made discovery simple. So that becomes a key thing. The second thing is obviously around transactions, because down the line, as these agents become more autonomous, they will be doing all kinds of financial transactions. So if you tell your agent, go book a ticket for me in this thing, it can go through the process itself, but it's transacting with somebody and it will need a wallet. And that is where the rules around blockchain are quite critical, because you can define that, make the payment between this and this amount, this is the gas fee you can pay, do not go below that or above that or below that. All those have been kind of perfected in the blockchain world in the last number of years through DeFi and a bunch of other use cases that blockchain is great at. And I think that's where this is going to start becoming the intersection between these two worlds.
So, no, I agree with you on the point that identity and transactions, I think, are the most straightforward applications, which are without a doubt the best things that blockchain can do better than anything else there in the market. But programmable compliance is something that I've seen a lot, in the market, that even the largest enterprises are saying without blockchain, that programmable compliance engine or the rule engine will not be effective or will not be, sustainable in a sense, which would need that blockchain element today or tomorrow, however you put it. So, in your opinion, is that one of the classic cases of the blockchain hammer finding a nail to hit, like that we started this discussion with, that where blockchains are force fitted because obviously a lot of research has already gone into that, and you don't want to you know give away that budget or write it off. Meta can write off the 80 billion it invested in a metaverse, but not every company can do that. So what's your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. And we ask ourselves the same question every day. Are we trying to force fit ourselves into any ecosystem? Because we've built, for example, this consensus protocol that's super fast. We get, sub 50 millisecond consensus, and it acts as a secure layer. But the question I ask our team every time before we go down any ecosystem is, does this system need consensus between machines or not? Right? Like, are there bad actors over here or not? Right? So you can obviously fit it in, because more security is always good. And it's an easy argument I can make in most cases. But the question really is, can they live without what Tashi does? And the same thing I would say is you know, to your question is the answer, where you can ask that, can AI agents be programmed in a compliant way without blockchain? And I think the way we're kind of typically seeing at least most of the deployments happen, there isn't a need. You're not seeing the large agentic companies right now chasing blockchain, right? So the blockchain companies are chasing the agentic companies, but the agentic companies are not chasing blockchain. And I think that's, like the writing on the wall over there is quite clear. Versus on the other side, for example, today you see TradFi companies chasing stablecoin companies. It's not like at some point it was the other way around, but today, uh, everywhere in the world, all TradFi companies are saying, "I need stablecoin infrastructure." So that's the clear writing on the wall when it says we need blockchain. It's obvious, because people start coming to you, and not vice versa. And we see that ourselves as well. Like one of our use cases, drone swarms, and we see people come to us and say, "Hey, I need a secure private mesh network." And consensus is great for this, and your ABFT algorithm will do this fantastically, and it's super fast, can be implemented. So we're not trying to force fit it. So that's, I think, the question that we typically, you only get to know when have your ears on the ground, and you just see that, which way is the traffic flowing, or which way is the demand flowing? Are people coming to the L1s, L2s, or any of these larger players and saying, "Hey, like, I need your, these smart contract libraries, like your, ERCs and SPLs, etc. And without this, it's very hard for us to do programmable stuff." Or they already have other ways to do it. And if they do, then I think that kind of, clearly answers the question that, are we trying to force fit this, or is it critical? And I'm sure it could be better. But the question is, sometimes critical and slightly better are two very different things.
Absolutely. I see your point. Uh, for me personally, I'm a very firm believer in that system of records has to be something new for that agentic world to work efficiently. Maybe AI agents themselves can do that. But that's where I see blockchain and smart contract layers and pre-built templates as a standardization mechanism for that governance layer, because otherwise then every company has its own, let's say, policy framework. For example, Meta acquired Moltbook and they updated the terms to put responsibility on the human operators for what their agents do, right? So you can't control these kind of scenarios. It's always out of your hand. But not getting into discussion deeper into that level, I had a curious question that I wanted to ask you. Obviously, we have been discussing about agent coordination and how Tashi fits into that. How Tashi is enabling agent coordination at scale, and I'll come to robotics as well, because that's quite interesting to understand how you are imagining your how you envision robotics in this whole scenario in the future, and where it fits right now. But in the current context, in a post agentic world, so to say, what is more valuable? Is it agent communication or agent coordination that you're trying to solve?
So if you kind of think about, they go hand in hand. So you can't coordinate without communication. So step one is the communication, and communication is already happening right now. What we are trying to solve is the coordination part. And the difference really is that there's different ways anyone can coordinate, right? So the typical way, like I was mentioned in the start, that most of the ecosystem is being built in the agentic world, in the robotics world, is everything is centrally orchestrated, where you have a server client model, and the server is the authority, and the clients could be, say, all the different agents, all the different robots, and so on. Uh, our kind of view is that for a number of use cases, that isn't ideal. In some use cases, it still is. So we don't try and replace everything. It's not, our idea is not to force fit ourselves everywhere. Our idea is that where does that model work better and where does our model work better? So I'll kind of talk through two different scenarios that we're focused on. One of them is drone swaps. So where you typically see, you know, drones going out into the wild. And when I say the wild, where you're essentially losing connectivity with the controller. And that's in a bunch of industries that this happens. It happens in defense, happens in agriculture, happens in mining, happens in search and rescue scenarios, and so on. And drones have obviously gotten a lot of attention of late. So it's something that everyone is looking at right now. And once these drones go out into the wild, they are individually autonomous and they're not coordinating with each other. And the reason for that is that you don't want them to communicate over open air. So, you could implement a peer-to-peer protocol and say, allow two drones to speak to each other. But there's always a risk that someone can hack in or somebody can join the network, etc. And because there hasn't been too many secure mesh networks, people choose not to allow them to communicate, where each drone is individually autonomous. Uh, so what we've essentially built this private mesh network, which allows all these drones to communicate and coordinate in a trustless environment. And that's the key part, right? So you can coordinate in different ways, but our way of saying of coordination is peer to peer without losing trust. The same applies to the robotic space. So what happens is, again, right now, everything is centrally orchestrated. And the problem there isn't that you're moving too far away from the central controller. You're actually still in the same warehouse, but there is double the ping in the coordination. So imagine you have two robots that are autonomously moving in each other's direction, and they all have sensors that kind of will make them stop. But why should they come to a scenario where they need to brake? If they should ping each other constantly that I'm going in this direction, where automatically they go about seamlessly. So right now, because they ping a centralized controller about their position, that controller pings robot B, and that's essentially it's not ideal in an autonomous world. So you think about, like, if you're in a classroom with 10 students and one teacher, and all the teacher tells the student that you can't speak to each other, right? Information will not flow. So, you're kind of getting a central way of controlling that, which isn't ideal. And you don't become truly autonomous unless you have collective autonomy. And that's where real productivity starts coming in. So that's what we're trying to solve for in robotics as well.
Is this what you mean by vendor lock-in? I read somewhere on the news, you mentioned that the next decade is making robots work together. I'll just read out the line I read somewhere. I wrote it down. So the next decade is making robots work together without vendor lock-in. Is this exactly what you mentioned?
Yeah. So to explain that in simple terms, right? Like a lot of people follow the Apple model, right? And what is Apple's model is you're locked into the Apple ecosystem. You don't kind of, you don't live anything outside. Your iOS inside there, everything is within that ecosystem. Tesla's built it in everything in the exact same way, where they have their own software, own hardware, the whole stack is managed by them. So from that perspective, down the line, right, when you have Optimus in the, out there and you have unitary robots, you want them to coordinate with each other. So when we talk about vendor lock-in means that, I might still like the Optimus robot, but if it can't coordinate with my unitary robot and I need that as well, then you're kind of creating silos. And sometimes in the future, you will need scenarios where you can break the silos. So for us, the goal is how do you break that silo and have true interoperability irrespective of which vendor you buy a robot from. So that's what we mean that you won't get locked into an ecosystem because our tech can work on everyone without compromising how they are built.
In a sense, it makes me wonder. We are currently divided by borders and language barriers. So this effort that you're trying to make is to ensure that the digital world is not divided by these things, but it is more connected from the start, right?
Absolutely. You said that perfectly.
So one other thing I had in mind, now that it's clear what Tashi is doing, and how this world, post-agentic world, is forming up. One thing that we discussed and comes up in a lot of conversation is that agents need sensitive data to make decisions, right? And you have said that at a personal level, we need to make sure that how we guide those agents, or how we set up the agents in a way that the sensitive data is only that limited sensitive data which they might need for coordination further. But how do you enable coordination without exposing proprietary data? Or you'll have to expose proprietary data no matter what. Or are you also thinking to use a system like zero knowledge proof or something similar?
For sure. So I think the first question, there's, I think, two parts to this, right? The first part of this is like, what all are you exposing? So what typically happens in what you call like a client server model is you're kind of have one person who's the server, and you're essentially connecting with that, and you have to kind of fall within their parameters. Uh, we're trying to say that everyone is the client and the server itself. Every node can kind of manage its own. So that's the first part of what we're trying to solve for, is making sure that you're not giving into somebody else's data sovereignty or requirements. So everyone becomes essentially a master node. That's the first part. The second part is obviously when there is some data that will be exposed. So not everything. So the first part that we solve for is that you're making sure that only data that's exposed gets shared. Uh, does that second part, what is shared with somebody else, then the question is more about, is the other person a bad actor or not? What can they do with it? So that's where I think some of the trust, privacy, security, all of those factors start coming in. That, do you know who you're interacting with, what they're doing, etc. So we try to essentially make sure that you're we also have, you're running consensus between all of these different agents, and that basically helps make sure that if somebody is a bad actor, it can be identified, and if it gets identified, then you can take remedial steps on it later. But yeah, this is all like nascent stuff that we're working on right now.
Amazing. So finally, Amar, thanks for this conversation. I think it has been really amazing to understand your perspective and get more clarity on the intersection of AI agents and blockchain. If I had to ask you one question, like let's say I'm building an autonomous financial system, what are the minimum non-negotiable features I should focus on right now? The very minimal non-negotiable features that I should keep in mind right now, which sets me in the right direction for the future. And whatever are the non-necessary ones, as you rightly put it, there are critical, there are better to have, good to have, and then other ones I can explore in the future.
Sure. So, I mean, I think when you talk about autonomous financial systems, right? Like, so I guess and just correct me if I'm wrong, you're thinking about an agent that can manage your finances, because
Absolutely.
it can be a million definitions within that.
Yes,
Uh,
absolutely.
yeah, I think so. The first one is that if you think of that agent, you should think about it in simple terms where you take away AI, right? And just think of it like a wealth manager today, right? That's essentially the thing that you're trying to replace. And if you think about it at a high level, what does the wealth manager do? It helps you first identify your own risk profile, right? Like, so Harman has, say, $1 million to invest. And what is your own risk profile within that? $1 million should go across which asset classes? Should something go into real estate and stocks and bonds? Why, how, where, when? So that is the first understanding that the financial system should have, of identifying your own context of what is the pool that you're kind of managing, what is the risk profile you're managing with, and where are you investing. So that kind of is the first definition of parameters, right? Like that your any wealth manager would help you with. The second part, like the wealth manager helps with typically, is creating an education for you as well, because obviously at the end of it, it's your money. So they will try and make sure that you have an understanding of where your money is going. If you're investing into Nvidia, then why? Or if you're investing into a real estate opportunity, then why is that? What is the return profile? So the second part becomes an educational focused part of the, this agent, where it's sharing market news with you and giving you the information that it's thinking along these lines and why. And there's obviously tons of information today agents can process and give you RSI data, stochastic data, etc., depending on your own uh, you know want and need of how in detail you want to go with the financial models and understanding of why it's suggesting any kind of investment authority. And then the third part is around autonomy, right? So even when you work with a wealth manager, there's multiple ways that they typically work. One is you say, hey, I just want to do SIPs. SIP is a fixed amount I'll put into a mutual fund at the end of every month. And they help you figure out which mutual fund, and there is no decision making on on your side. It's more automated. The second is where they'll help you just invest into indexes or a few kind of more less risk kind of categories, and they're kind of just doing oversight around the funds. Or it's like the much more active ones where you're like, listen, I understand the market, you help me as well, and together we'll go find the 10 best stocks to invest in, and I'm risk focused, which is a lot more dynamic, right? Every day you're tracking things and understanding what's going on. So those parameters will then define that what does the agent need to do on a daily basis. Because if your kind of original risk profile is more risk averse and you put, like 10% in crypto, 20% in stocks, 70% in bonds, and you're like, okay, I'll let the 30% ride out and just keep an oversight on it, then not much needs to be done. If it's the other way around, you're like, I put 10% in bonds and 60% in stocks and 30% in crypto, and every day's news impacts how I change this, and I want to move things around, then how things would happen would be different, right? Because it's creating, so all these levers need to be programmable as per how what you were saying within the agent. And it gives the person who's managing this financial system their own ability to kind of change these levers. So I think what happens is that when people think about the agent, they're directly going into AI. But abstract that, think what it's replacing. It's replacing the average wealth manager. And if you think about the gamut of things that person typically does, you want that financial system to have that end-to-end capability in there. And that, I think, once it get maps out fully with those levers internally programmable, that's what a fully automated financial system would look like.
It's like having your own personal Berkshire Hathaway if you are able to get those kind of insights and how they perform and how they operate, and then you are able to replicate that. I get that. Amazing. So I also, while you were explaining this scenario, I wanted to ask you: can you paint me a picture where you see, or when you feel that you have succeeded in implementing Tashi, where you see agents coordinating with robots, and a scenario where you see, okay, Tashi has enabled this fast ecosystem and makes you proud of your venture further.
For sure. So I think just to add some context, right? We've been building Tashi for like more than 3.5 years now. The first 2 years was in stealth mode where we were building the core tech. And, in year three, we actually chose gaming, or in the early days, we chose gaming as our first beachhead, where we said that this is a good sandbox for us to prove ourselves out there. Because one of the core reasons for that was that gaming is latency sensitive, one of the more latency sensitive industries in the world. Uh, like crypto and financial world isn't, because a few milliseconds doesn't matter as much in money transfers versus in a game. You know that you're kind of with the first person shooter game, you're operating under a 60 millisecond limit, where anything more than that impacts actual gameplay and players drop off. So we kind of use that as the main sandbox to build this technology, and implemented it in a couple of very interesting games where the goal was to solve multiplayer serverless gaming. Of late, as we've expanded into other ecosystems, I think the one that's gotten the most excitement from us externally is the drone swarm use case, because there was an excitement around drones, say maybe 10 years back, and it essentially dissipated because people kind of, you, things come, get their hype cycle, and people stop thinking about it. And today, people are now back into that world, and the US is focused on realizing that they have no drone manufacturing capability, and they're building massive factories and investing. They've, I think, identified hundreds of billions of dollars for the drone ecosystem over there that they're investing in there right now. And it's because it's one of those devices that actually does multiple things. Because if you want to spawn the world, by air is much faster than by road, because you have oversight and it can do many things, right? So one of the bigger use cases is in agriculture, and we've kind of obviously done a bunch of pilots in the defense space, which have been super exciting, because your first line of offense and defense both can be drones at this point of time. And if you have, say, 10 drones in the sky that are all coordinating with each other, that makes it a lot more impactful. So we've kind of already proven that in tons of simulated environments. We're running live tests in the coming weeks, so it should get released quite soon. So there will be drones in a live environment running on Tashi. And once those go live, I think we'll love to share those results. That's what we're most excited about immediately.
Looking forward to that. Please do share that with me when it's available, when it goes live. Excited to see that in action in terms of the drones. And Thank you again, Amar. This has been a very insightful and exciting conversation. I think our journey from understanding AI agents to agent coordination and communication, to first identifying that the rule engine is still something that is important, but before that the setup is which makes or breaks the whole situation. It's like the foundation behind the foundation, in a sense that everyone thinks rule engine is the first thing to imagine, but there is something before that that you need to focus on. um, so that's quite an interesting take personally for me, and I'm sure for a lot of our audiences. And moving from that understanding towards blockchain's importance, identifying, establishing identities and transactions as two of the biggest use cases, and the blockchain hammer that we talked about. I think it has shaped up quite well, and I'm really glad that we had this discussion. Thank you for your time and insights today, and I look forward to our discussion in the future.
Thank you so much for having me. And my shout out to you as well for doing the multitude of things you do. I think just for the rest of the folks out there, Harman is a very talented young guy. And one of the things we connected on is that he's helping accelerate the youth in Punjab specifically, which is one of the biggest regions in India, to learn blockchain and AI and kind of see how they can, use these technologies as they build their careers. And we're very excited to kind of explore how we can work on this together. And so more power to you in all the things that you do, and super excited to have been here and chatted about all these things.
Thank you so much, Amar. Thank you so much. It's all possible with help of people like you, and thank you for that support.
Anytime. Our pleasure.
And